We'll get a look back at camp and a look ahead to preseason game number 1. Joining us on the Western Hotline, Chris Brown, of course, of One Bills Live, and calling the game on Saturday for Bills and Giants. Chris, good morning. Injuries. We spent half our time at camp listing the injuries during our shows.
Yeah, and as Sean said, the list has been longer this summer. I don't think there's any debate about that than in recent years. And, to his point, this time of year, you're probably less concerned with the final score on the board at the end of the game. You're more concerned with fitting, as he said, the pieces together. Who plays well off of one another, particularly on defense, where they're trying to cull together a lot of new pieces, if not in the starting lineup, certainly in the rotation on that D-line, which combinations of players play most effectively together. That's the big part of this evaluation this preseason. And if you're down a couple of those players, you've got some concern. You get to the regular season if some of these guys can't get back.
Chris Brown with us. Is there anybody that comes to mind, Chris, for tomorrow's game that maybe didn't have, the flashiest training camp while we were at St. John Fisher, that if they had a big day, the vibes would go up?
Yeah, we haven't really seen much from Laviska Shenault, right? I think a lot of people thought that this was a guy who, he certainly passes the eyeball test. I mean, he is put together at 6'1", 227. And I think there was some thought that, okay, this guy has worked with Chris Tabor before, the special teams coordinator. If he can really show up and show out, and granted, you don't see a lot of full-speed special teams drills, so the preseason was going to have to settle that competition between him and Codrington. But at the receiver position, you were hoping he could at least give you something there, demonstrate an ability to block in the run game, and, maybe make a play here or there, and perhaps even factor into some of that pre-snap motion. Because I look at him, guys, and I see a potential, Cordarrelle Patterson, if you want to use him in that fashion, because he's built the same exact way. We haven't seen any of that, and we haven't really seen him factor into the passing game all that much, even with this team so devoid of receivers due to injury. So I think he's a guy that's got to really step up and flash here in the preseason.
Yeah, it's been interesting watching the receiver, I guess, the hierarchy play out. Coleman's been healthy and available the whole time, and I think by all accounts he's had a really nice camp. Palmer, a little bit of an injury, groin issue, right? Shakir got hurt. I mean, almost everybody else seemed to get dinged up. Tyrell Shavers as well. McDermott went out of his way to praise how Shavers is trying to make this team, which, I don't know, Chris, do you think, let's start there with Shavers. Kenny, because of the injuries? I mean, last year it sounded like it might have been his time, and he did get in some game action. This time it sounds like he's playing hurt at camp to prove himself, and McDermott is calling him a true Buffalo Bill. Like, the coach has got high praise for a guy that's seems like he's always on the bubble and can't quite seem to find his way to a full-time spot.
Yeah, and could he get caught up in a numbers game again? He certainly could, because I think you can easily find your way to naming 5 guys prior to calling his name. And are they keeping 5? Are they keeping 6? What's the situation at tight end, and how many are you keeping there? So those are all the number concerns that you have to navigate your way through as a coaching staff to get your best, quote-unquote, best 53. I don't think it's any secret that Sean McDermott enormously appreciates guys that just put their nose to the grindstone and work. And Tyrell Shavers would certainly fit into that category. And so I think he's a guy that has clearly earned the respect of the head coach and clearly does everything the right way. And maybe more than anybody else over the last 3+ years has respected the process. If you want to talk about somebody that has earned it, Tyrell Shavers might be at the top of your list. And look, he's made plays. It's not like the guy's a try-hard guy, but does he really do anything? He's made plays. So I think he's backed up the hard work with results as well. Now, carrying that into the preseason is going to be important as well. But if he goes ahead and does that, yeah, I mean, he's got a shot, a legitimate shot.
On Curtis Samuel, who basically misses camp with a hamstring injury, I wonder how the Bills feel about him. They sign him, and he's got experience with the offensive coordinator. Last year, it's the turf toe that keeps him out for a while. Allen points out they kind of can't get on the same page just because of that. Like, everything was kind of delayed. And then late in the season, we started to see that pop going to the Denver playoff game as well. Do you feel like the Bills would have a level of, whatever? It's frustrating to see him miss so much time, but knowing the skill set, the talent, and the fit started to show what it is supposed to be.
Yeah, and I know that I was just as encouraged as the next person about what we saw from him at the end of the season, not just the Denver playoff game, but the Kansas City playoff game. I mean, him and James Cook were the two guys that Josh Allen was relying upon the most in the second half of that football game. And I believe Samuel had the go-ahead touchdown for them in the fourth quarter, before the ultimate outcome happened. So you were seeing some really good things from Curtis Samuel. The problem is there's an availability issue there, and we're back where we were last year at this time. When he had a couple of injuries that he was dealing with and trying to play through. It's nobody's fault. It just happens, and I know that based on how his contract is structured, there's no thought of moving on from Curtis Samuel, not this year anyway. So I think you're in a situation where you just have to kind of let it play out. You're still about a month from the opener, and see where he can get between now and then. Can he get on the field? And then more importantly, can he stay on the field? And what are you getting from him? I think that's kind of how you have to play this out at this point in time.
Chris, I think there's a backup quarterback competition probably to be had here in the preseason. Was there anything really that separated Mitch Trubisky and Mike White in training camp to your eyes? I mean, I don't think there's any debate. Trubisky might have the early lead here. He's the incumbent. He's been here before, the contract, and he's starting tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is a competition, and I think the proof will come out in the preseason. I think that's where you really see and can evaluate, who has been the superior performer. And I think this coaching staff will give both players equal time with the quote-unquote starters or second-teamers, as it were, so as not to handicap anybody, with third-teamers to work with and playing against third-teamers. I think they really want to get as accurate an evaluation as they can on those two guys. I thought Mitch Trubisky's best practice may have been the blue and red scrimmage. He was fantastic in that practice from start to finish, in a practice, that Josh barely did any teamwork. I think he threw 4 passes in 7-on-7, and then he had a baseball hat on. He was fantastic. I mean, he's facing all-out blitzes, throwing off his back foot and dropping it in the back pylon in the end zone to Dalton Kincaid in double coverage. I mean, it might have been the best throw I've seen Mitch Trubisky make in a Bills uniform. So you have those moments and those practices, and then unfortunately he did not have a great throw in Wednesday's practice. It was a poor decision, and it winds up being an interception. You're going to have those, but all of them count, right? So they all go into the evaluation. But, yeah, it's weird. Through the course of the practices at training camp, I just feel like we've seen more Trubisky than White, and I'll be the first to tell you I haven't counted their snaps, but it just feels like I've noticed Trubisky more in the practice setting than I've noticed Mike White.
Chris Brown joining us on the Worcester Hotline. Bills and Giants tomorrow. Defensively, Chris, as we shift to that side of the ball, there's been a lot of change over there and, a fair amount of returning players as well. I feel like, as we start with injuries on the offensive side, we're there on the defensive side as well. Of course, Maxwell Hairston and his injury, which keeps him out a little bit. It's maybe ironic's not the right word, but when Hairston goes down, we fear another kind of Cole Bishop situation. And then soon after, Cole Bishop is kind of back in the Cole Bishop situation where he's having issues staying on the field as well. And I feel like we're kind of right back where we were this time last year, where there's snake bit in the secondary, and the injuries back there might lead to some issues to start off.
Yeah, I'm less concerned with corner because of how good Trey White has looked. And I'm more concerned about safety, not just because you're down Cole Bishop, but you're down Taylor Rapp as well, who, Sean McDermott said yesterday is going to miss about a week with a knee injury. So this was the tandem that you had penciled into the lineup, and this is their first opportunity to get some time on the field together and as close to a game-like setting as you're going to find, and they're both unavailable. that's a concern because it's a new pairing and they need as much time on the field as you can possibly get them in game-like situations. So that's not good. There's no other way to slice it. Can they make up for lost time? We're going to have to wait and see. But that was the penciled-in starting tandem. You're not going to see it in any capacity tomorrow afternoon. You got to hope that both can get back and can play with one another before the preseason is out, because going against that Ravens team in week one, if you have limited time on the field together, I'm a little wary.
Yeah, McDermott kind of spoke to this a little bit yesterday about he'd rather have the injuries now than the playoffs, but that it can make it tougher. I mean, the safety injuries, the linebacker injuries in and out, the suspensions on the D-line. I feel like the managing of the roster and reps, maybe there's been more of that this summer on one side of the ball, Chris, than there maybe ever has been.
Yeah, and, it's the side of the ball that has the most new stuff to pull together, right? So you want them on the field so you can get the proper evaluation, know that, okay, I'm set at this position, let's move on to here. Okay, let's see what these combinations look like here on the defensive front. I think it's been hard for the defensive staff to really hone in on what works best with the players they have on the field in terms of scheme and play calling for down and distance situations, because they just haven't had them out there enough. I'm sure they have a semblance of an idea of what they'd like to do, but you want that confirmed for you on the field. The number one thing for coaches is knowing that they can trust players in certain situations, and that trust is reaffirmed through reps on the field being executed properly. So when players are out of the lineup and coaches don't have that, it gives them a little agita, guys.
Chris Brown on the Western Hotline. Chris, on James Cook, it's been a big-time story of camp, and the twists and turns, they haven't been that big in the last week. I found it so interesting that McDermott, when asked if he expected Cook to be there, said yes, and then said, well, I expect all players to be there. Meanwhile, there have been several reports that the two sides maybe aren't as far apart as people might think. And I don't know if there's an end in sight. I don't know what's going to happen with James Cook. He's going to the walkthroughs. He's going to the meetings. He's just skipping practice. Yesterday, Allen kind of takes up for him to a degree. We desperately want him out here. He's handling generational kind of business. It's a sticky spot. And I don't know if you have a prediction on the resolution or a predicted timeline, but we're kind of just hanging in limbo right now.
Yeah, we are. I think that, you've just got to kind of let those things play out, at the level they're playing out, which is obviously the front office and his agency. And, you got to hope that there's some common ground that can be found. I think a lot of us hoped that with the Kyren Williams contract, even though he plays significantly more snaps in the Rams offense than Cook does in Buffalo, you have a guy from the same draft class, comparable numbers in terms of production over the last 2 years. And to me, the parameters on a new deal are pretty much laid out for you by the Rams. I thought that might, break the dam, so to speak, and, let negotiations flow. But that hasn't happened to this point. Does it change? I suppose it could. James says he wants to be in Buffalo. So I don't know. I just think the number that was thrown out at the beginning of the spring is unrealistic. The Kyren Williams contract proves that. So you got to hope that some people have some come to realism moments and figure it out, because I think both parties know how much they benefit. The Bills obviously benefit from having Cook in their lineup. I think Cook knows how good a fit he is for this offense. So you just got to hope that the two sides can reach some kind of compromise.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many people think he might miss games. Joe and I have talked about this. We don't think it'll get that far, but if it were to happen, or if they're to move on from him and find a taker. Like, would you be concerned about what would happen with the offense? It's an offense that has, a proliferation of contributors. We know that. But Cook is their explosive piece. And as you mentioned in Kansas City, he was one of the guys that was the reason they were in that game.
Right. I think he's the second most dynamic athlete on the offensive side of the ball next to Josh Allen. And you even heard Sean McDermott say it after the season was over in his season-ending press conference. You need 2 to 3 elite talents on each side of the ball. And for the Bills, that's Allen and Cook. Could someone like Keon Coleman or, Khalil Shakir perhaps get to that level at some point? Sure. But right here, right now, it's Cook and Allen. Those are your elite talents on offense in terms of the skill position players. So, he's a critical piece on the offensive side of the ball. If you have to move on from him or whatever, you better get a comparable talent coming back to your roster in return, because in my estimation, you would be down a major piece for this season.
Do you feel like, Chris, as this hold-in has been going on, I almost feel like maybe there's different types of hold-ins? Like, I wonder if some players around the league, their hold-in is more about, like, let me make things as uncomfortable as possible. Like, let me make this awkward, like, kind of help push the team into doing something. Whereas the Cook one, I don't know, McDermott doesn't come off as it being that way. Allen doesn't. I think Bean maybe is let down, but just by the fact that he had a streak going of, like, never having something like this happen, and this is the first time. But he's doing the mental stuff. McDermott said he's doing walkthrough stuff. You feel like with Cook, it's just more about I'm not putting my body at risk than it's I'm trying to make things uncomfortable?
Yeah, I would probably agree with that if you forced me to make a choice. It's kind of like James said, it's business. I don't think he likes business getting in the way of him doing his job because he's wired a certain way, which is what made him so attractive to the Bills in the first place. He's all about the work and putting the work in, competing and excelling. He's cut from the same cloth as a lot of the other players on this roster. And that's why he's got so much respect in the front office and amongst the coaching staff, because he does his work. He's quiet as kept, and he excels on the field. It's hard to be disappointed in that. And business has kind of compromised, I think, his own personal work ethic. So I'm sure he's not loving it, but I think he knows, or at least he believes, this is the step he has to take to try to get to a place contract-wise where he'll be satisfied.
Final preseason game at Highmark. A lot of special moments, and a special Kids Day, right? Like that's the kind of thing where it is a preseason game. But we were saying earlier, Chris, like you never know. The secondary market, the cheapest ticket to this game is $28, which is kind of unheard of in the preseason. So you might have an eager crowd because you never know who's going to be at that Highmark Stadium for the last time.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of last times this year, right? I guess if there was ever a year to be nostalgic each and every week, it's probably this season. So I think a lot of people are going to be taking a lot of long looks, around the stadium, whether they get there for one game, 2 games, whether they're season ticket members, whatever it is, they're going to be taking long looks around when they're in that building because they know that they're going to have to take their snapshots then because there won't be another time.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris, and have a good game on Saturday. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, good to talk to you guys.
All right, Chris Brown, he's got the call, of course, with Eric Wood on the Bills preseason opener against the Giants. That'll be tomorrow at 1 o'clock. It's going to be hot.